So far, vaccination has been the only effective medical response to the coronavirus. There hasn't been a drug to treat the disease. Now, Molnupiravir is raising hopes that COVID-19 can be cured. One existing medicine after another was tried during the pandemic. None was found to be truly effective. This time, researchers are cautiously optimistic. Could it be the breakthrough treatment? I'm Ben Fazul and welcome. Molnupiravir was developed to treat the flu, but caused a sensation when it was shown to be effective against COVID-19. Now the World Health Organization says it's looking to issue guidance for its use. The US company behind the drug, Merck, known worldwide as MSD, has applied for approval in its home country and says it can make 10 million courses by the end of the year.
It's a small capsule that's raising high hopes. Molnupiravir is the first potential prescription pill for COVID-19. Its manufacturer, US pharmaceutical giant Merck & Company, says it's of particular benefit to unvaccinated patients with underlying conditions. In trials, the drug cut hospitalizations and deaths by half.
Having a pill that people can take at home when you know that they're high risk and they've caught COVID, that has the possibility to be transformational. This is one of those tools in the toolbox that we have just been lacking so far.
Since the pandemic began, scientists have been working to develop an antiviral medicine that patients can take at home. So far, the only treatments approved in the US have to be administered intravenously or by injection. They are also very expensive. Virologists warn, however, that Molnupiravir is not a magic bullet.
Although we're pleased and optimistic about this drug, which is now applying for emergency use authorization, it should not be a substitute for preventing infection in the first place, which is why we get vaccines.
The US Drugs Authority, the FDA, could approve the medication in the next few weeks. Just in time before winter accelerates COVID-19 infection rates once again.
For more, let's talk to Simon Clark. He's a microbiologist at the University of Reading in the UK. Tell us what you think about this new possible breakthrough treatment.
I think it's a very exciting treatment, a very exciting and interesting way of administering an ability for doctors to block the virus from replicating and therefore causing a more severe infection. So we don't have a huge amount of antiviral medicines compared to the sort of more traditional antibiotics, which of course do not work against viral infections. So this is a very exciting, very interesting new therapy, which should be, I would expect, useful against other infections as well.
Can you tell us exactly how it works, how it manages to block the virus?
So when the virus is replicated inside our cells, because our cells act like mini factories for making new virus, this chemical introduces changes to the genetic code, and that stops it being replicated, basically. And if you can't produce more genetic code, more genetic material, you can't have more virus. So that's how it works. And like I say, I expect it will work with other things. We hear that it was originally developed for treatment of flu, but I think it's got potential other applications as well.
What about the time window within which it has to be applied to the patient? I know it can't be used too early or too late, can it?
No, they have to have what is called mild to moderate symptoms, and we're not exactly sure what that means. But there is it seems a fairly tight window. If you give it to somebody too late, then they're not going to be able to benefit from it. And if you give it to them too early, that could cause problems as well. It really does depend on getting the timing right. And we've seen that with other treatments as well, the steroid treatments that we see, which also reduced the numbers of deaths in intensive care units quite significantly.
Simon, just how successful has it been shown to be in medical trials?
So in high-risk people, administered at the right time, it reduces their risk of death by about half. So, of course, not everybody who who is high risk is going to die from COVID-19. And not everybody who dies from COVID-19 is high risk, if that makes sense. So it's difficult to know exactly how those numbers will fall. But to take or to reduce the risk for the highest, the most vulnerable people by half is a substantial chunk to take out of this. So it's not a silver bullet, it's not a cure, but it will save an awful lot of lives.
And is there enough of it? I mean, manufacturers are cranking up the machines. Will there be enough Molnupiravir to treat people?
Eventually, yes. So in the short term, my understanding was that a lot of the production had already been reserved and bought out by certain countries. Of course, Merck MSD might be able to increase production substantially, and that will mean they'll be able to supply more people. But there will be huge demand for this, and there will be, I suspect, a lot of complaining from some quarters, particularly the developing world, that they don't have access or sufficient access to this drug.
Is there any way of getting around that?
Well, just to produce more, but of course, the production facilities, the substrates, the chemicals that go into making this medicine, there is only so much of that available around the world. So there are supply bottlenecks inevitably. I would be very surprised if Merck MSD are just able to turn on the taps and satisfy everybody's demand in the short term, even if they wanted to, which I'm sure they would. But life isn't that simple.
No, it's not. Simon, one last thing, looking at the bigger picture, where will this put us in the fight against the virus, in ending the pandemic?
Well, it will take a substantial number of people out of death statistics, basically. It will mean that it saves an awful lot of lives. But I'll remind you that over a year ago, we hit upon treating people in intensive care with dexamethasone. That saved about 1/3 of people who would otherwise have died. But we still had enormous outbreaks. We still had a lot of people filling up our intensive care wards right across the world. And I don't think that this medicine will in itself stop that from happening, but it will save an awful lot of lives. In
itself, so what are you alluding to? Are there other drugs in the pipeline that you're hopeful about?
There are other drugs in the pipeline, yes, and people will be developing things all the time. But of course, this medicine is not active, not efficacious in everybody. It needs to be remembered. It is not a guarantee of success. It's not a really viable alternative to a vaccine.
Simon Clark there for us, talking about the effects and the hopes for Molnupiravir, a treatment for COVID-19, which a lot of people are holding out hopes for. Simon Clark's a microbiologist at the University of Reading in the UK. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Meanwhile, the World Health Organization has granted emergency use authorization to Indian drug maker Bharat Biotech's homegrown COVID-19 vaccine. The WHO's backing paves the way for Covaxin to be accepted in many other countries and allows India to donate it to the global COVAX effort. The decision also makes it easier for Indians who've received the jab to travel abroad. India already granted emergency authorization in January, and it's become the second most widely used COVID-19 vaccine in the country. It's the 7th coronavirus jab to win WHO approval. Our science correspondent Derek Williams now, and an important question about getting the COVID vaccine.
If I already had COVID-19, why should I get vaccinated?
For a simple reason, because the evidence is convincing that getting vaccinated, even if you had COVID-19, reduces the chances that you might get it again. Scientists have looked long and hard at whether immune protection is stronger or more lasting in those who had the disease or in those who've been vaccinated. And a new large-scale study published last week by the CDC in the US seems to have answered that question. It found that unvaccinated people with a previous infection were 5 times more likely to later come down with COVID again than people who were vaccinated. Now, it's still not clear how well those results will hold up over time. The probabilities could change in the coming months and years. For example, if immune protection from vaccines ends up waning in a big way. But right now, at least, it's comforting to know that the vaccines that so many of us have received at least protect us from infections in the short term, even better than having had COVID-19 would. Which is why a lot of healthcare authorities now also encourage people who had the disease and recovered to go ahead and get vaccinated anyway. In some countries, they recommend both shots post-infection. In others, they recommend just one shot. Getting vaccinated after recovering even appears to provoke a turbocharged immune response that researchers are calling hybrid immunity or super immunity, because those people have extremely high levels of the antibodies that protect against the virus.
And just a day after the US approved coronavirus vaccinations for kids aged between 5 to 11, they've started getting the jab. Like here at a school in Ohio, where pupils have been receiving pediatric doses of the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine, along with superhero badges and some snacks. While the risk for children is much lower than for other age groups, they can still spread the virus. So with infection numbers growing, increasing the number of people who are vaccinated is key to slowing the pandemic. The US territory of Puerto Rico is going a step further and saying the jab will be mandatory for school attendance. Nice to have you along. Stay safe and see you again soon. Bye-bye.